We're joined today by Al Schmidt, Pennsylvania's Secretary of the Commonwealth. How would you characterize how the 2024 general election went?
I think the election went very smoothly. We had sort of typical issues that you might find on election day, nothing out of the ordinary in many precincts in Pennsylvania. We had one issue in Cambria County that was a county-wide issue related to the tabulation of votes at the polling place, but didn't result in any voters being unable to cast their vote or a single vote not being counted. So you do encounter problems every election. It's all about how do you overcome those problems and make sure that voters can make their voices heard.
Prior to the election, what improvements were put into place to help county election officials work more efficiently?
Well, we worked very closely with our county partners. I visited all 67 counties to sit down with their election directors and their county commissioners to find out how the Pennsylvania Department of State can be more supportive of their efforts. I ran elections in one of Pennsylvania's counties for 10 years, but that doesn't mean I know everything about every challenge every county faces. So it was a matter of spending some time with them, hearing from them, and making sure the Pennsylvania Department of State was fully supportive of their efforts so that they could run election day smoothly and mail ballot voting went smoothly and all the rest. And I think as a result, we had a free, fair, safe, and secure election in Pennsylvania.
Prior to the election, some had speculated that artificial intelligence could pose a problem. How was the state able to prevent AI from disrupting the election?
You know, we spent a lot of time talking about that and meeting about that. Every national, we have the National Association of Secretaries of State gathering. Every one of those always had something focused on AI. Fortunately, we did not see much of it this election cycle. And really it was about identifying it when it did occur and making sure that you were proactive in pointing it out to make sure voters weren't misled or deceived by efforts to undermine confidence in election results or anything like that.
You recently announced that the Department of State will conduct a risk-limiting audit of the 2024 election. What does that entail?
After every election, every county in Pennsylvania undergoes two audits. And they're both mandatory. One is called a 2% audit, where it's a random 2% auditing of election results to make sure that those results were accurate. And the other is something called a risk limiting audit, which is recommended by all sorts of social science professionals in medicine and elections and all the rest to make sure that voters can have confidence that their votes are accurately recorded. So when people talk about auditing elections in Pennsylvania, we have two audits after every election to make sure those results are accurate.
On election day, there were a handful of bomb threats that were sent to both election polling places as well as county government buildings where the ballots are going to be counted. Were any of those threats credible?
None of those threats were credible. We were aware of them and the possibility that they might come our way through talking with our federal partners because they had happened in other states throughout the day. So we were aware of the possibility of occurring. We were prepared for it when it did occur. It caused minimum disruptions to voters. There were a couple of counties that moved polling places in the last hour before voting ended, but voters were still able to cast their vote and make their voices heard. The whole point of threats is to intimidate and to be disruptive and to coerce. And I think the most important thing is to identify whether they're legitimate or not, and to make sure that it does not succeed in preventing our representative democracy from functioning the way that it should.
Earlier on election day, Donald Trump had posted on social media about massive cheating in Philadelphia, and I believe he had similar tweets about Chicago and some other cities. Were there any evidence found to support any of his claims?
No, that's not accurate. And when you make claims, presumably those claims are backed up and supported by examples and evidence in court or anywhere else. And we did not encounter that.
The one race, statewide race that has not yet been resolved is the U.S. Senate race between Bob Casey and Dave McCormick.
Right.
The Department of State had announced that it would be going into an automatic recount. Can you talk a little bit about what that entails?
In Pennsylvania, 20 years ago, Pennsylvania passed a law requiring automatic recounts whenever results for an election were within 0.5%. So our recounts are automatic. They are required. They are mandatory. They're not a sign that anything is amiss or that there's some confusion as to the results. It's simply a recounting of the votes that have been already counted when you do have a race that's very close, as this one was. So now our counties go about recounting all their votes to make sure that people have confidence in the results.
Just a day or two after the election, the Associated Press and I believe one or two other entities as well had called the race for Dave McCormick before all of the votes have formally been counted and a winner has not yet been declared. What do you think about that practice of whether it's a media entity or somebody else calling a race?
Yeah, and the Pennsylvania Department of State doesn't say declare winners or anything like that. We report vote totals as reported to us by our county partners. So, I think it's frustrating at times for viewers and voters when it seems like this process is dragging on for many days, if not weeks after the election. But it does in every single election, whether it's close or not. Every vote gets counted that is cast by an eligible voter on or before Election Day. So this process is the same process that we undergo in every single election.
For the actual physical recount itself, are votes counted by hand, or do you utilize different tactics than what are utilized on Election Day to ensure that that number is accurate?
That's a really great question. So part of it is that the recounting of the ballots be done either in a different method or using a different system than what was done before. So if they were counted electronically with a tabulator that could be hand counted, or if they were using one type of tabulation system, they have to use a different one. It's just to make sure that that recounting is done using a different method or a different system than the first time to make sure that results are accurate and aren't compromised in any way.
Who pays for costs associated with the recount, and what does a recount typically cost?
The Commonwealth of Pennsylvania pays for it. The taxpayers pay for it, really. In previous statewide recounts, the most recent one was actually Dave McCormick's recount because of his vote totals relative to Mehmet Oz just a few years ago, and that cost a little over $1 million. So I would expect that this statewide recount will cost a similar amount.
Historically, have recounts led to a change in who is assumed to be the winner?
No, none. So we've had 8 recounts since 2020. 3 were declined, so the recount never took place. The rest were carried out, and they did not in any way impact the outcome.
And again, what is the deadline for the recount to occur?
So counties are currently are engaging in the recount right now. They have to complete it by the 26th of November and report to us by the 27th.
What lessons has your agency learned from perhaps the prior 2 elections, 2020 and 22, that you've taken with you this time around?
I think part of it, one real challenge that we encountered was incredible turnover with the people who are running elections at the county level. The Pennsylvania Department of State and the Shapiro administration set up an election training team to make sure that we recruited experienced election administrators to train newer people. And I think that's really one reason why this election went so smoothly, that despite all that turnover, we had people in place training our county partners to make sure that everybody knew what they needed to do to make sure that we had a free, fair, safe, and secure election, and that it ran smoothly on Election Day.
Are there specific policies that your agency would like to see the legislature pass, perhaps either to standardize some practices that vary from county to county or other ways that might make elections more efficient moving forward?
I think there are several. After this election is behind us, Election Day is behind us, but the counting and recounting is not yet behind us. I'm certain we are going to get together to identify and approach the legislature about specific ways to improve elections in Pennsylvania to make sure that we can do what we can to maximize voter accessibility and further strengthen election integrity. So I have no doubt as a result of this election and previous elections that there'll be some improvements that will suggest. Act 77, which brought about mail-in ballot voting in Pennsylvania, is still relatively new. The first time we had it was 2020. We have a couple of elections behind us now, so we can assess how how we can improve the experience for voters in Pennsylvania.
Al Schmidt, Secretary of the Commonwealth, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.